Between 2030 and 2050, climate change will cause pain worldwide. An estimated 250,000 additional deaths will be recorded per year, according to the World Health Organization. The causes will come from malnutrition, disease, and heat stress. Building climate-resilient and environmentally sustainable health systems is one of the goals at this year's UN Climate Change Conference. It's an issue that drives my next guest, Yinka Bodhi-George. We met in Chicago at the Aspen Ideas Climate Conference.
I think the most important thing about climate change is making it resonate with just anyone and everyone. And the reality is climate touches everything, every facet of our lives. And so I would say just name an issue that you experience in your daily life. If it's, getting your kids to school on time, or making sure there's good food on the table, or, maybe someone in your family deals with asthma. Climate change just makes all of that stuff worse. If it's making ground level air pollution worse, or making our agricultural yield just more difficult to yield, it's just a pervasive issue. And so you have to care about it because it'll touch your life. Even if it doesn't feel like that immediately, eventually it'll reach you. So it's a really big issue.
Bodhi-George is the founder, president, and CEO of Sustain Our Future Foundation, a national nonprofit working on environmental justice and sustainable development through infrastructure expansion. Okay, as a little kid, I could see you on the swing set, but I don't see you on the swing set saying, my goal in life is to do sustainability and to work and partner and all. So tell me about your journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I'm an environmental public health scientist, and the way that I arrived there was just seeing how people's conditions, their environmental conditions, were shaping their health outcomes and their economic outcomes. And while I didn't have the name for that as a little kid, it was definitely a pattern and phenomenon that I could see, right? It's like where you lived was shaping your life. And so from that sort of perspective, I studied environmental health in school, and it gave me such a strong analysis on how public policies can shape communities, and the way your community is shaped then shapes your health outcomes and eventually your life outcomes. So that sort of direction led me to the field of sustainability because, historically in my career, I had a very antagonistic relationship with companies, fighting bad energy producers and things like that. And when I joined the sustainability world, I recognized the opportunity to actually help shape the field because people actually wanted to get things right. And so I joined the field of sustainability to do that work and make sure that we're progressing sustainable infrastructure, but in a way that really centered the values of equity and justice principles.
So interesting. Words mean so much, and that's why I love the name of your foundation, Save Our Future Foundation. I mean, those 4 words, it says a lot. Talk to me about arriving at the name and then what the goal is with the foundation.
Sure. So it's Sustain Our Future Foundation because we center sustainability in the work that we do, and it's very important for us to sustain our future. And so for us, it's all about how we can shape sustainability and opportunities in sustainability in a way that better centers community partnership. So we like to say that people actually have a very inappropriately neutral framing on sustainability, in that people just believe it's inherently positive, to decarbonize our energy grids and our buildings and things like that. So sustainability and sustainable development is just perceived as a positive contribution to society. But the reality is development as usual practices have never existed in a neutral fashion. It's always existed with an underpinning dynamic of some people being sacrificed for other people's benefits. And we run the risk of recreating that dynamic with sustainability if we're not careful. And so for us, our mission is oriented around disrupting the way people do business as usual practices in sustainability so that we can actually meet the moment and get things right. So we're not further creating sacrifice zones. We're actually creating communities that are enriched and, communities who have historically faced harms and neglect at the hands of sort of corporate progress are now better positioned to be leaders and beneficiaries of all of the benefits generated from the sustainability industry. So from us, it's a conversation around community partnerships. It's a conversation around equity, and the end goal really being a more justice-oriented society that is sustainable.
Would you just outline lofty goals? I think everybody would be like, that's fantastic, but it's not easy, is it? I mean, talk to me about the challenges you face.
So we identify as a bridge between corporate sustainability teams and communities who live in proximity to some of these massive infrastructure sites. So think about a large-scale solar farm, right? What we see is a challenge in having conversations between communities and companies, because often these two groups of people have never really been in meaningful conversation. There's power hierarchies that have historically occurred and things like that. And so as that bridge, we help to translate. We often, speak the language of both groups so that people can better understand each other. And we spotlight the opportunities that exist when you're able to partner meaningfully with a company or with a community organization. It's challenging because there's a lot of historical harm that has happened at the hands of companies across communities. And so there's a lot of distrust that community groups and community stakeholders in general feel. But in that, there's also an opportunity to get things right when you champion new and different practices and power dynamics that are more positive.
You're operating in a world where people are so polarized. How do you inject yourself in there and bring these two sides together?
I love to say that people believe people who are trustworthy, and the way that you are trustworthy is by being honest, actually being trustworthy. And so we help our company partners show up in community in a way that is trustworthy. And we help our community practitioners better understand the opportunity to partner with the companies in that way. So that looks like a lot of conversations and convenings. But the most central point is making sure that the community members are actually receiving benefits. It's not enough to say, well, we'll listen to your opinions and, we'll show up better and be more accommodating. People have to tangibly feel how positive these projects are in their community. You can't just put a massive solar farm and say, well, we're decarbonizing the energy grid. They have to feel it in their pockets. They have to feel it in their daily lives. And so by constructing community benefit strategies where that is the case, where you're actually directing funds towards people's livelihoods and improving their climate resilience, then they'll start to trust you and believe that this general lofty sustainability goal is meaningful to them as well.
So we're talking communities and companies, which is hard enough. But prior to that, you were working with lawmakers, legislators, and they're polarized. What's that like? I mean, you don't take easy jobs, I guess.
I guess I don't. Well, the thing is, when you're working with folks deeply committed to their constituents and their communities, it's all about values. And so when you're selling an opportunity for policy change and things like that, you have to go back to the values. Everyone just wants their families safe and at home. And framing environmental opportunities like that is the key. Also, the public health piece goes a long way, right?
The UN identifies climate change as a significant threat to human health. The most vulnerable populations and poorest nations often bear the heaviest burden, despite contributing the least to global emissions. I once interviewed somebody who said, look, when we're born, we don't choose our zip code, but our zip code has a great kind of defining measurement on what our life is like. If you're born in one zip code, boy, the sky's the limit. If you're born in another zip code, everything's stacked up against you. Would you agree?
I would agree. Your zip code is such a strong determination, even stronger than your genetic code of your health and life outcomes. And I had a former colleague who used to very brilliantly say that health is a production of society, right? Health is produced by society and societal factors. And that is the case. We are all sort of subjected to a variety of environmental health factors. So where you live, where you sleep, what you eat, how you access those things, those are all factors that shape our health outcomes. And it's really, really important, more important than just your general genetic code.
It's interesting. One of the words you used earlier was equity, and that seems like such a bad word in some circles now. Let me get your thoughts on that. First of all, that it's seen as a bad thing. I mean, equity you would think is a good thing, but some people are like, "Oh, equity, DEI." You hear it all the time. Why is it being framed that way? Give us that historical context. Give us a framework to work within.
Yeah. You know, in our country, for example, there have been a number of policies that have created systematic disadvantages across our communities. One in particular that I love to highlight is redlining policies, right? So the idea that certain neighborhoods were disregarded and essentially shut out from income generation through property value increases and mortgage lending. So people in that region that was designated as a redlined region, maybe mortgage lenders wouldn't lend to them on the basis of their social identity, usually being because they were Black or brown people. And so though that policy may not exist any longer, the sort of remnants of the policy are still persisting throughout our society. And if you look at formerly redlined areas across our country, let's take Baltimore City, for example, you can still trace back those redlined areas to food insecurity that currently exists in Baltimore City, right? So there's a compounding effect that disadvantage can create, where if there is not a lot of income progression in that community because people were not allowed to create generational wealth, well, now you don't get good grocery stores because the grocers aren't going to site their grocery stores in a location where it's likely that people can afford to access those stores. And so there's a compounding effect that happens. Though the policy may have been eradicated, the remnants are persisting. And so that has so much, widespread impacts on people's outcomes, even across generations.
Yeah, I saw a documentary many years ago about Anacostia, which is in the Washington, D.C. area, where they actually located a region of Anacostia, and they showed no grocery stores, 20 liquor stores. I mean, it's kind of to your point. So then stretch this out in terms of environmental justice and how you see that playing out, and how you basically shut the door on what you're describing, the past and how things were done, and how you want to see the future outlined.
Yeah. So for environmental justice, this is essentially the notion that regardless of what your social identity is, the way you look, the skin color, where you live, you deserve whatever is conducive to your wellness, right? So how can we repair our society to make it so that regardless of where you live, what your social identity is, you have everything conducive to the best version of yourself? That's essentially the charge of environmental justice. And why it's so critical in this moment is it's important to recognize how we got to the climate crisis. We got to the climate crisis because so many communities and so many environments were disregarded for the progress of companies and for our society. And when you look at the root cause of the climate crisis, the reason why we have so many, carbon emission points is because we haven't taken into account community wellness and environmental wellness. And so the charge of environmental justice in the moment of the climate crisis is, well, let's really dig into the root cause contributors of carbon emissions and solve it from the most roots, points, so that we aren't continuing to exacerbate, carbon emissions, so that we center our environmental conditions. And in doing so, we won't disregard them so much and center our populations. So in doing so, we won't disregard them, build out all of these really harmful sites that, again, are contributing to the climate crisis.
Last year, Tropical Cyclone Cheeto destroyed or damaged more than 150,000 homes in Mozambique. The UN worked with local communities to construct low-cost facilities that act as climate-proof shelters during severe weather. The UN program, called UN Habitat, has supported over 25 cities worldwide to put in place climate change strategies at the local level. What does victory look like to you? I mean, because you've got to work with both sides and each one comes from a different point of view. What's a good outcome?
You know, we center community benefit planning in our work at Sustain Our Future, and we start by first partnering companies with community stakeholders so that they can have meaningful conversations about how these massive infrastructure projects take form in their communities. So take, for example, a solar farm that's taking form in a community. Success for us looks like having meaningful conversations about, thinking about the project siting, planning, making sure that community voices can shape all of those different things. So communities can come in and say, maybe don't site on this culturally sensitive land, look at this other location so that there isn't harm being generated across communities. And eventually, too, generate benefits, actual funding to flow into the local resilience of such communities as well, right? So not only are we decarbonizing on a societal level, we're also cultivating very meaningful and tangible benefits for communities who have to live in, hyper proximate locations to these projects so that they're not just being sacrificed for the progression of, our society. They're actually receiving benefits as well. So for us, success would look like redefining what a sustainable infrastructure project looks like so that community benefits isn't just an add-on, it's actually such an ingrained part of project development.
What's the feeling like when you actually do come up with a solution-oriented approach like this?
Well, the feeling, I think, for communities is relief. A lot of folks don't even know yet you can ask for benefits associated with these projects. One thing that is really important for us, we're a nonprofit organization, and my team is a group of former organizers and folks who come from sort of community organizing backgrounds. So we present very differently than a general conventional corporate sort of practitioner. And so there's a trust that's sort of inherent in our posture because people perceive us, they see themselves in us. So when we show up and we're talking about our justice-oriented work and our benefits outcomes, I think communities are relieved. They didn't know that this was even possible. And for the companies, there is that same relief because they simply don't have the capacity to work in the nuanced nature that we work with community.
They don't understand it.
They don't understand.
It's a different language.
Yes, totally. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is great.
Pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure to make sure.